In this video, we're going to go over understanding dynamic chaining in Copilot Studio. So a lot of people are going to ask the question, what is dynamic chaining and why do I even care about this? And the best way to explain dynamic chaining is when I am able to take information from one place and use it in another place downstream, and I don't have to necessarily program that into the Copilot or virtual agent that I'm building. It will just dynamically do this. And there's a beauty of this when you start going into large language models and being able to use large language models to be able to orchestrate conversation within this new conversational AI space that has been enabled with generative AI technology. So I'm going to explain this by using some examples and kind of walking you through on how this works inside of Copilot Studio specifically, because I think it's one of the probably best superpowers that Copilot Studio is bringing to market and really innovates in this space. So I'm going to start off with explaining what's on the right-hand side of this particular diagram. And for those that don't know, Copilot Studio has three major components that you can build with. One is going to be knowledge, which is basically information like documents and SharePoint document libraries or PDF files or Word documents or text files, things like this. This is like unstructured data typically, and how you get information out of this is a lot of times people will use what we call a RAG pattern or retrieval augmented generation. If you don't know what that is, it's basically the same concept as search over a set of data that I'm asking you to look over and then summarize a response. Just like ChatGPT is a industry or a consumer version of this. When we go down to the next one, which is topics, topics are where I'm in control of the conversation. I'm being very specific. I want to author and experience exactly how I want it. I might use some generative AI technology, but primarily the maker of the system is orchestrating the conversation and saying, this is exactly how I want you to do this. Like if you wanted to report your credit card as stolen, as an example, I might need to do that in a very specific way and maybe even author exactly how questions are being asked and things of that nature. So that's where a topic really comes in. Then we go down to actions, and actions are those things that this is where things get really interesting because I'm not just searching over data. It means that I can actually have a conversation with structured data, but I can also do things with APIs. So I can start interacting with APIs and not just getting information, but I can start taking action itself. So I can do post actions against APIs or get actions or patch options. So these really open up a lot of different capabilities for you. So if we start talking about how this all works, you can imagine that a user goes in and they talk to Copilot Studio, and then Copilot Studio, with this new function that you'll hear us refer to as the planner, basically can make a decision, and it can say, I think what you're asking for is in knowledge. So I'm aware that I have all these different assets and they're all explained what they can and can't do. So in this case, I'm going to route it to knowledge because you're asking a question about travel policy. But then maybe I want to orchestrate the conversation to a topic because I want to report my credit card is stolen and I need to go through that process. So that's an example of being able to use a topic. But then we have actions. So maybe I want to look up my account balance or something of that nature. And that's all found in some sort of API. Well, being able to do all of these different things and having all these different assets and being able to decide which one of these assets is the right asset to be able to provide you with what you want is a key component of this new planner capability that's coming into Copilot Studio, which is a key part of something that will be enabled, such as dynamic chaining, being able to take information from one and pass it to another. So let's look and see what that looks like. So if we're thinking about dynamic chaining, let's take a simple scenario that we all have had to do before in our life, which is wanting to check our account balance. And in the case of this, I'll use an example of checking like my checking account balance as a perfect example of something everyone does every day. And how does dynamic chaining work to be able to do something like this? So imagine if I had an authenticated user, notice that on the left here, and they ask this Copilot Studio implementation a question, a very simple question, such as, what is the balance in my primary checking account? Well, just because I'm authenticated doesn't mean that I know what the account number is to be able to get your balance. Now, the planner is going to look at this inside of Copilot Studio, and it's going to look at the assets that it has available, and it sees that to get the balance, I need to go to the balance API to get it. And so that's an action that I've already gotten built, and I know I can get the answer to the question from the user, but I don't have the inputs required because the balance API is going to need the primary checking account number as an input to be able to answer this question. But can I actually get the answer to what it needs as an input? Can I go find that the account number in some way to be able to get the answer? Because I know that's where I've got the answer. And in this case, I know who you are because you're authenticated, which means I can potentially get that and use that as a mechanism to be able to provide it to the account details API because we've defined the inputs and the outputs of it. So therefore, I can say, oh, I know who you are, so I can use your account information to look up your primary checking account's checking account number and then provide that automatically to the balance API to get the answer to the question of what is your balance, and then simply just reply back to the user with the answer to the question of what is the balance in my checking account. And by doing this, I'm doing it all dynamically. It's not programmed into it. It's because everything has inputs and outputs, and it has a description of what each of these things can do and what each of those things need as inputs in order to generate the output that it has available. Having this available to you is really a superpower behind the planner because it gives you the ability to take and get experiences that cannot necessarily be programmed every potential iteration. But this allows us to be able to basically do assembly at runtime that allows us to be able to make that decision and let Copilot Studio decide what assets it needs, come up with a plan on how to be able to accomplish this plan, and then provide the answer to the user dynamically without the author having to write every possible scenario. This is a major enhancement in the capabilities of generative AI, and it kind of feels like magic when it does it. But this is really the future we're living in. So as you start thinking about Copilot Studio, you want to start thinking about all the different assets that you're going to start wiring in, and all of those different assets becoming things that have inputs and outputs and how you should and should not use them. It's the key to why model descriptions will be super important as we go forward when you're building in Copilot Studio. So I hope you found today's video super insightful and very helpful. If you ever want to get more information about Copilot Studio, please like and subscribe to my channel. And as always, you can try Copilot Studio at aka.ms/trycopilotstudio.